Simplicity is the soul of efficiency. Austin Freeman. Functional programming is object-oriented programming. Introduction. Nowadays, there are numerous programming languages that are becoming more general and all-purpose. But these languages have their specialists, and each language has its own advantages and disadvantages. In this video, we are going to learn about functional programming and object-oriented programming. Overview. Functional programming. Functional programming is the form of programming that attempts to avoid changing state and mutable data. In a functional program, the output of the function should always be the same, given the same exact inputs of the function. This is because the outputs of a function in functional programming poorly relies on arguments of the function, and there are no magic that is happening behind the scenes. This is called eliminating side effects in your code. Functional programming also supports the programming languages like Lisp, Clojure, Wolfram, Erlang, Haskell, F#, R, and other prominent and domain-specific languages. Functional programming is a great fit for data science work, and R is a popular language among data science. Functional programming languages can be translated well into an interactive environment, which makes the understanding of code easier. Functional programming provides advantages like efficiency, lazy evaluation, nested functions, bug-free code, parallel programming. In simple language, functional programming is to write the function having statements to execute a particular task for the application. The function can be easily invoked and reused at any point. It also helps the code to be managed, and the same thing or statements does not need to write again and again. In functional programming, functions are referred to as first-class citizens. Object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm in which you program using objects to represent things. You are programming about sometimes real-world things. These objects could be data structures. The objects hold data about them in attributes. The attributes in the object are manipulated through methods or functions that are given to the object. The main deal with object-oriented programming is the ability to encapsulate data from outsiders. Encapsulation is the ability to hide variables within the class from outside access, which makes it great for security reasons, along with leaks, unwanted or accidental usage. Most programs use object-oriented design say that it is a style of programming that allows to model real-world scenario much simpler. This allows for a good transaction for request to code that works like the customer or user wants it to. Object-oriented programming languages are C++, C#, Java, Python, Ruby, PHP, Perl, Objective-C, Swift, Dart, Lisp, etc. In an object-oriented application, objects can be easily reused in another application. New objects can be easily created for the same class, and code can be easily maintained and altered. It also has the feature of memory management. It provides a great benefit in designing large programs which can be easily divided into smaller parts and helps in distinguishing the components or phases that need to be executed or planned in a certain way. Difference. Key difference between functional programming and object-oriented programming. Functional programming is used for performing many different operations for which the data is fixed. Object-oriented programming used for performing a few operations which are having common behavior and different variants. In functional programming, a state does not exist. In object-oriented programming, the state exists. Functional programming has a stateless programming model. Object-oriented programming has a stateful programming model. In functional programming, a function is the primary manipulation unit. In object-oriented, an object is the primary manipulation unit. In functional programming, it's a function have no side effects means it does not impact code running on multiple processes. In object-oriented programming, its methods can have side effects and may put an impact on processes. In functional programming, the focus of programming is what are we doing. In object-oriented programming, the focus of programming is how are we doing. Functional programming mainly supports abstraction over data and abstraction over behavior. Object-oriented programming mainly supports abstraction over data only. Functional programming does not support conditional statements. In object-oriented programming, conditional statements can be used like if-else statements and switch statement. Functional programming provides high performance in processing large data for applications. Object-oriented programming is not good for big data processing. Basic comparison. Functional programming emphasized an evaluation of functions. Object-oriented programming based on a concept of objects. Functional programming use immutable data. Object-oriented use mutable data. Functional programming does follow a declarative programming model. Object-oriented programming does follow an imperative programming model. Parallel programming supported by functional programming. Object-oriented programming does not support parallel programming. In functional programming, the statements can be executed in any order. In object-oriented programming, the statements should be executed in a particular order. In functional programming, recursion is used for interactive data. In object-oriented programming, loops are used for interactive data. The basic elements of functional programming are variables and functions. The basic elements of object-oriented programming are objects and methods. Functional programming is used only when there are few things with more operations. Object-oriented programming is used when there are many things with few operations. Conclusion. Object-oriented languages are good when you have a fixed set of operations on things. And as your code evolves, you primarily add new things. This can be accomplished by adding new classes which implement existing methods and the existing classes are left alone. Functional languages are good when you have a fixed set of things, and as your code evolves, You primarily add new operation on existing things. This can be accomplished by adding new functions which compute with existing data types, and the existing functions are left alone. To put it simply, when you are working across different boundaries, object-oriented programming is an excellent method to keep everything packed up and secured from unwanted external usage. Whereas functional programming works well when the complexity is contained. One could argue functional programming thieves in front of end spacing because backends are often given objects to front end to process. The client does not care about maintaining object states. It's already given to them, probably in the form of a JSON object. You don't really need to play an inscription by putting an object into an object. Object-oriented things works well in the back end because most of the time you are requested to consider something to give to the next boundary. It need to packed up, wrapped in ribbon before posting it away into the unknown. Functional programming and object-oriented programming used a different method of storing and manipulating the data. In functional programming, data cannot be stored in objects, and it can only be transformed by creating functions. In object-oriented programming, data is stored in objects. The object-oriented programming is widely used by the programmers and successfully also. In object-oriented programming, it's really hard to maintain objects while increasing the level of inheritance. It also breaks the principle of encapsulation and not fully modular even. In functional programming, it always requests a new object to execute functions, and it takes a lot of memory to execute the applications. Finally, to conclude, it is always up to the programmers or developers to choose the programming language concept that makes their development productive and easy. Thank you. Like, share, and subscribe.